The season 16 finale of Grey's Anatomy, despite COVID pushbacks, drew 16.5 million viewers when it aired this past May, breaking viewership records for the show and continuing its position as one of the most watched dramas on television. Medical dramas like Grey's Anatomy are not new to television, however. City Hospital was one of the first medical dramas to air on TV, with the genre becoming a primetime staple due to Dr. Kildare and Ben Casey that aired on NBC and ABC respectively. Since 1952, around 80 fictional medical dramas have aired on just United States television alone. Grey's Anatomy is one of the most popular to air in recent history and has been hailed for its progressivism compared to other shows airing alongside it. One episode from season 15, entitled Silent All These Years, stands out as one of the most prominent episodes from the show and one of the most important episodes of any show in television history. The episode had an overarching theme of supporting and uplifting the victims of sexual assault, dismantling victim blaming, and teaching lessons about consent and sexual abuse in general. And it was followed with a PSA given by actress Ellen Pompeo urging viewers to call the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network and the National Sexual Assault Hotline if the viewer or someone they knew was being harmed. This actually increased interaction with the RAINN Twitter account and certain key search terms by 1,097%. And the National Sexual Assault Hotline's call volume increased by 43%, both for 2 weeks following this episode. This isn't the only influential episode of Grey's, and it won't be the last. Other Grey's episodes have spotlighted mental illnesses like PTSD, schizophrenia, and depression. They've brought out LGBTQ+ characters, not only the main cast, but highlighted them as background characters when most shows haven't. They've had episodes that centered around transgender patients and their adversities, and all of this while also spotlighting an inclusive array of LGBTQ+ and minority actors. But as the show has continued to increase in popularity and adopt more of a serious attitude, have aspects of the show that have been considered progressive revealed that the show continues to perpetuate stereotypes about the medical field, sexuality, and race. Grey's has been groundbreaking in the fact that there are dozens of examples of episodes in which characters dismantled stereotypes, usually of race, gender, or their sexuality. But at the same time, certain characters and plotlines of Grey's Anatomy have actually heavily leaned into certain stereotypes in a not-so-positive way. The steps forward that Grey's has taken in representation for the LGBTQ+ community, for people of color, and for women in the medical field have all had stereotypes trailing them. Stereotypes are defined by media scholar Ellen Sider as systemic representations in which people are judged from a certain point of view, and although usually false, these tend to suggest that all people of a group act in this way or are defined by that certain characteristic. Stereotypes are usually generalizations or extremely oversimplified. However, there's a stereotype for everything and for everyone. Different sexualities, races, genders, and even jobs all have stereotypes that are applied to them. Different aspects of the medical field have actually been sexualized and stereotyped for ages. A lot of the sexual stereotypes surrounding medical jobs play on gender roles, and how those gender roles have affected the expectations of certain jobs. For one, for most of history, nurses were expected to be women as they were deemed the caregivers, and male nurses, because of this, are often labeled as feminine. But the majority of women being nurses also bred the sexy nurse stereotype in media, and it has destroyed any accurate portrayal of nurses in movies and television shows. One of Grey's worst character arcs on the show was that of its nurses. In the case of Olivia Jankovic, one of the show's main nurses in the early season, when nurses were even given names, most, if not all of her plotlines have revolved around sex, including her sleeping around, spreading STDs, and being involved with one Dr. Alex Karev while he was seeing another intern. There was also the Nurses United Against Mark Sloan debacle, when a group of nurses who Dr. Sloan slept with banded together essentially because they were being written as upset over being reduced to hookups and wanted to call him out for it. However, this still stands as a shining example of the nurses in Grey's Anatomy being promoted as overtly sexual. Not many nurses have had prominent roles in the show, and one of the main ones that did had her character essentially reduced to being a sex object, as she is literally a person regarded by other characters only in terms of her sexual attractiveness or availability. On the other hand of this stereotype, male nurses who very rarely appeared in medical dramas were often scrutinized, patronized, and used as a source of comedy. Researchers from the School of Nursing and Midwifery at the University of Western Sydney argued that even though these shows would try to highlight these characters and come off as more progressive, they still ended up implicitly reinforcing stereotypes about male nurses. Only 2 of the nurses with prominent roles or speaking lines on Grey's have been male. That was Nurse Tyler Christian and Nurse Eli Lloyd. Tyler Christian was often depicted as sassy and effeminate, and Eli Lloyd was only around as Dr. Bailey's boyfriend. His character didn't have much of a role aside from that. This kind of character design doesn't do too much to take away from the stereotype of the sexy female nurse or the flamboyant male nurse, and in later seasons, the role of nurses has actually been pretty much kicked to the side. There haven't been many nurses that had a line further than "Yes, doctor." Nurses is another recent medical drama airing on NBC that also sexualizes and sexually stereotypes some of its characters. One of the nurses on the show had a sexual relationship with his technical superior, similar to various relationships on Grey's, both that would be a real-world fireable offense. Something different between these 2 shows, however, is that Nurses tries to address some of the fallouts of medical coworkers and their sexual relationships or romantic partnerships. One of the characters was sexually assaulted by a previous partner who was a higher-ranking doctor at a different hospital than the one the show takes place in. Going public with her story brought her a lot of doubt to her care abilities, and other doctors scrutinized and made fun of her, as well as accusing her of making it up for attention. However, the show has really attempted to highlight how her peers overwhelmingly have supported her and have been shown to take care of her. On Grey's, situations like this haven't exactly been dressed in a good way, especially in situations like Nurse Olivia's. Olivia got nicknamed Typhoid Mary, and she was degraded, embarrassed, and harassed by her coworkers throughout her run on the show, and was offered little support from the characters that viewers see the most of. This leaves an extremely negative impression on not only her character, but it also slut-shames women and subtly reinforces the sexual nurse stereotype. Another interesting aspect of this show is its portrayal of LGBTQ+ relationships. The show has featured multiple gay, lesbian, or bi couples, but there has been somewhat of a downside to this that ends up falling into the realm of stereotypes. Many of the LGBTQ+ characters were shown sleeping around, and while this is technically just another display of the sex and drama that brings in so many viewers, it can be extremely damaging for the reputation of certain sexualities as they're portrayed by the characters, especially the bisexual characters. An already extremely demeaning stereotype of bisexual people is that they can't choose, or that they're greedy, or that they like to sleep around, and Grey's does not shy away from this. Callie Torres, one of the orthopedic surgeons on the show, was always depicted as an extremely sexual character and someone who would sleep around with various men and women. Torres' lesbian girlfriend / wife / ex-wife Arizona Robbins cheats on her during the course of their relationship. Dr. Teddy Altman's bisexuality has only been recently disclosed on the show, but it's been written very poorly. Teddy's story very much fits into the cheating bisexual stereotype, as Teddy slept with someone who was in a relationship while they were all roommates, and cheated on her fiancé soon before they were supposed to be married. A character from the Grey's spinoff show Station 19, Maya Bishop, who identifies as bisexual, is dating Dr. Karina DeLuca, a character from Grey's, and eventually cheats on her with a man. None of the LGBTQ+ characters in the show have had persistent, stable relationships or relationships that ended well. It's not great representation for the LGBTQ+ community, especially at a time where in the real-world medical field, more attention worldwide is being drawn to the care of LGBTQ+ patients. However, as the show has continued airing, more of the background characters have actually been good depictions of LGBTQ+ representation, and the show has begun to normalize their presence. Shonda Rhimes, the original showrunner and creator of Grey's, also employed the process of blind casting for the show, when characters aren't given a race in their description and are cast regardless of that, alongside with the casting of LGBTQ+ actors. However, within its first few seasons, the characters of Dr. Miranda Bailey and Dr. Christina Yang were already being criticized for fitting into racial stereotypes. Dr. Bailey was seen as the sharp-tongued, sassy black woman, and Dr. Yang as the asexual Asian overachiever, as defined by Ellen Sater. Even though Shonda Rhimes, Chandra Wilson, who plays Bailey, and Sandra Oh, who plays Yang, have all defended the characters and argued race didn't come into play at all with the writing, it still ended up defaulting into pervasive stereotypes. Race wasn't even really addressed ever in the early seasons, seemingly falling into a colorblind narrative. And in some instances, as noted by Kristen Warner, this neutralized the importance of minority actors who appeared on the show. Warner goes on to note in her study that despite ignoring race in the dialogue and events of the show, most of the press did center on how important it was that there was such a diverse range of representation in the cast. This is supposed to signify progress, but like many of the progressive points of the show, the underlying stereotypes, whether intentional or not, may overshadow all the good being done. One could argue that the prevalence of stereotypes, despite the show being more progressive than most shows on television currently, is what keeps viewers watching. By creating characters that fit into stereotypes, the show plays to viewers' expectations, making it easier to watch, to continue to enjoy, and to keep earning money. Grace has managed to pull in millions of viewers over 17 seasons, and there's no doubt that its predictability keeps a tight grip around mass cult audiences. However, although it still defaults into some stereotypical television tropes, Grace has definitely taken steps forward in representation and has been, and continues to be, the pinnacle of primetime television for almost 2 decades, and having been confirmed for an 18th season, it will probably continue to dominate its time slot for years to come, while also continuing to break grounds and make important strides for representation in drama and television for people of color and the LGBTQ+ community.